echo chambers for one. Right this way. It's the Bipolar Index for cataloging madness, and today we're flipping to E. The type of echo chambers I want to talk about today is that of self-reinforcing feedback loops pushed beyond our agreed-upon reality. The kind that can lead to what some are calling AI psychosis. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but cases are popping up where AI models' egregious tendency to validate us has amplified delusional and disorganized thinking in users. Whether or not AI psychosis is a legitimate new diagnosis or just a new way pre-existing sensitivities can be triggered is still to be determined by more evidence. But I'm more concerned about how echo chambers can interfere with reality checking. My own algorithm presented me with Plato's allegory of the cave on multiple occasions. And in this context, I think swallowing that pill alongside Jean Baudrillard's simulacra and simulation is useful. In Plato's allegory, prisoners are chained in an enclosure where they can only see shadows from objects outside the cave, projected by a flame onto the wall in front of them. These shadows are essentially their only reality, despite them being flat, distorted renditions of our complex, colorful three-dimensional world. To be freed and to see the fully rendered objects is painfully enlightening. But also it's difficult to convey back to the other prisoners without things turning hostile. So in the context of these large language models, when it takes sources, bastardizes the content, presents misinformation, confidently misquotes, or hallucinates as the metaphor goes, are we the prisoners in front of these shadows? And does taking ChatGPT's word for it without any sort of independent review sink us further into our collection of false images? Baudrillard tackles this problem of reflections obscuring true reality, whatever we agree that looks like, from another vantage point. Because while Plato helps us understand reality distortion, Baudrillard helps us understand reality replacement. And overarching questions he speaks to might be, are we so willing to cede reality, and would finding true reality even be objectively good? I'm mostly interested in Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality, which describes a condition where representations aren't simplifying the source. Instead, they augment it and replace it entirely, kind of like when a copied meme becomes over-rasterized due to repeated saving and re-uploading. He describes substitutions for reality that become more real than the source itself. Disneyland is his classic example, which he says is presented as imaginary in order to make us believe that the rest is real. Whereas all of Los Angeles and the America that surrounds it are no longer real, but belong to the hyperreal order and to the order of simulation. It is no longer a question of false representation of reality, ideology, but of concealing the fact that the real is no longer real and thus saving the reality principle. Instead of false representation, Baudrillard finds that the issue is the concealment of the fact that the real is no longer real at all and the desperate attempt to preserve the idea that it is. So perhaps we can think here about AI that feeds off of data points generated by other AI. Or perhaps the dead internet theory, which posits that the entire internet is all bots talking to each other. I also think our algorithms are part of this unmediated increase of simulated experiences. And Baudrillard implied that this type of scenario would result in a breaking point, where people aren't capable of really engaging with anything that's not optimized to their personal comfort. And he described this shift as moving through stages, from images that reflect reality to images that distort it, to images that mask its absence entirely, until finally we reach hyperreality, where meaning no longer depends on the real world at all. This starts to overlap uncomfortably with how psychosis sometimes functions. Because when beliefs are endlessly reinforced without resistance, and every output confirms the internal logic of the system, reality checking kind of becomes moot. Because madness isn't always about mood, it's also about how reality itself can reorganize. Madness builds a dual plate that maps over like a layer building meaning faster than consensus can follow. When I was thinking about how I want to catalog echo chambers, my sister recommended that I watch Bugonia. And in the context of reality distortion and hyperreality, I think the film reminds us that the spectrum doesn't account for unreality, a complete divorce from our shared consensus as an escape from trauma and a protection of the self. The main character, Teddy, adopts an alternative explanation to the great whys in his life, including the trauma of effectively losing his mother due to reckless clinical trials, his molestation as a kid, and his absent father. Whether or not his conspiracy theory is true, Teddy takes a hostage, and we find him deep in the belief that she is an alien seeking humanity's destruction. That belief is supposedly substantiated by his own research. He essentially built a coherent system of facts about how their mothership looks, how they communicate via hair, and how antihistamine lotion weakens them. The overarching hypothesis drives the narrative, demanding not only a suspension of reality, but also the adoption of a companion worldview in the undercurrent, one that unconvincingly negotiates with Teddy's logic before breaking. Through it all, I found a man who rejected reality consensus after the collapse of his personal world. And I found a woman who is forced to create consensus to save herself. So when reality becomes unbearable, incoherent, or even actively hostile, Plato's prisoners rather live in the dark. Baudrillard's copies become oversaturated. And Bugonia bridges the two, kind of, and asks us what happens to reality once rendered and processed through our coping strategies. But the end of the film was a pretty poignant call to still live, laugh, love.